Good evening. In this edition, the information program, The News. Today's broadcast, we begin with a report from the Kremlin, where the President Boris Yeltsin met with a group of specialists on questions of the domestic policies of Russia. To the meeting, which was held in the auditorium where previously the presentations of confirmation certificates by foreign ambassadors were held, and which currently bears the mysterious name Auditorium Number 3, 7 people were invited. 6 members of the Presidential Council, Dmitry Volkogonov, Oleg Kisilov, Ot Talatsis, Emil Payin, Alexei Salmin, Leonid Smiryagin, and the recently appointed Economics Minister of Russia, Yevgeny Yasin. Participating in the meeting also were Viktor Ilyushin and the newly appointed aide to the President on economic issues, Alexander Lifshitz. The President entered the auditorium in a good frame of mind, which probably determined the benevolent atmosphere of the entire meeting. We incidentally can only surmise this since the press members were politely thanked and were asked to leave approximately 10 minutes after the beginning. Although this time was quite sufficient for the Russian President to express his attitude to the journalist fraternity. Initially, upon greeting Ot Talatsis, he exposed his awareness of the criticism against him made by Izvestia, and later he underlined the attentive attitude of the press toward changes occurring in government. Speaking about the aims of today's meeting, Yeltsin noted, "Today, we are discussing with a group of specialists, I feel prominent specialists, domestic issues, political, military, technological, social, economic areas, etc. These are domestic issues of domestic policies, issues of internal policies, how we are progressing in areas where we are stumbling, and what we must correct. Let the specialists and professionals of high class tell us. In general, emphasis is on the professionals rather than on the politicians. Today, new appointments in the government of Russia were announced. By presidential decree, the new vice premiers are Oleg Davidov, he is 54 years old. Until recently, he'd been the Minister of Foreign Economic Ties, and also Alexei Bolshakov, he is 55. For several years, he was the General Director of the Petersburg Joint Shares Association on high-speed roads and highways. Simultaneously, he'd occupied the post of the first Deputy Chairman of the Leningrad City Council. Tomorrow, the President of Russia flies to Vzhevsk. The main focus of this visit is the 75th birthday of the outstanding Russian engineer, the designer of the world-famous system of automatic firing weapons, Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov. Are you perhaps somehow offended that your weapons are often used in our hot points, that is, in points of the former USSR? I have answered this question several times, that I created the weapons for the defense of the borders of our country. And for me, it is unpleasant to watch when these weapons are implemented in inter-ethnic conflicts. I suffer because of this. For almost 2.5 centuries, the Vzhevsk weapons plants were the basis of mass production of firearms in Russia. Almost 40 years ago in Vzhevsk, mass production was launched of the Kalashnikov automatic weapon. As of today, this is one of the best systems in the world among systems of automatic weapons, which often proved its exclusive reliability in the most difficult circumstances. For decades, the world-famous inventor was known personally by very few people. Today, the laureate of the State Lenin Award and 2-time hero of the Socialist Labor, honorary president of the Union of Weapons Manufacturers of Russia, Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, often meets with journalists, attends the most prominent weapons exhibits of the world. And so the celebrations will be held tomorrow in Vzhevsk. The chairman of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, spent yesterday in Kiev. A report from Natalia Chernyshova. If one glances at the itinerary calendar of the trips of the head of government through the country, in its majority you'll find they're connected connected with the military-industrial sector, which is not surprising, since matters here stand far worse than even in agriculture. And the overall number of buildings, the volumes, technology, decline of productivity are far higher. In Kirov, where Viktor Chernomyrdin arrived for a one-day visit, 80% of the plants nonetheless are connected with the defense sector. And now the depth of conversion is 90%, so even at successful plants such as the Kirov-Chipetsk chemical plant, the staff is forced to adopt a 4-day work week. And their production line, which is produced only here, is for sale basically abroad, because for the military-industrial sector in such volumes it is no longer required, but for the domestic market is not yet required at all. The chemists ask that tariffs be lowered on electrical power, transportation, and to be delivered from the yoke of the social sphere. Only then prices will reach normal levels, and only then will goods acquire realistic sense. It will be easily purchased and sold at a profit. The unbelievable efforts to keep afloat are undertaken by the auto manufacturing plant of Attack, which traditionally had manufactured aviational aggregates, catapults for destroyers, mechanisms for rescue work. Now, conversion has forced the launching of the unfamiliar area of goods for domestic consumption, and honestly speaking, there are not many victories here. And yet the plant survives. The first, by observation, almost hysterical reaction, "Where's the money?" has already passed. However, to number this among successes is premature. It's probably more a sense of apathy. Boris Yeltsin met today with Anatoly Chubais, who was in his new capacity as the first vice premier of government. Among a broad circle of economic problems, they discussed issues in forming a civilized securities market, protection for the population's monetary means, and also interaction of the government and central bank in view of the recent collapse in the rate of the ruble. We'll add to this report that in trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange, the rate of the ruble did not change toward the dollar and was 3,102 rubles for $1 American. Today, the weekly publication Arguments and Facts published a list of banks which, as stated in its editorial commentary, having seized the moment on Black Tuesday, realized enormous amounts of dollars at an increased rate, approximately 3,900 rubles for $1. More than the rest, that is $800 million, was realized that day at the exchange by the central bank, having realized more than 314 billion rubles. Following in sequence are Mosbank with $14 million, the Oil Chem Bank 12 million, Alpha Bank 7 million, and so on in descending order. Today, at the regular session of the State Commission on Perfecting Payments and Transactions, Alexis Kavets stated that the problem of non-payments in the construction sector was caused mostly by the absence of a market system for investment in the sector. As was noted at the session, a contributing factor in overcoming the crisis will be the ratification of a realistic budget, the severe reduction in government-controlled construction, and strengthening control, especially bank control, over managing budget-financed building projects. The situation remains extremely tense, connected with supplying Moscow with gasoline. It's delivered to the capital along a so-called short-term emergency schedule, which provides delivery of oil directly to the Yaroslavsky, Ryazansky, and Kirovsky oil processing plants, from whence gasoline will be transported to Moscow. In the opinion of the Energy Minister Shafranik and the Mayor of Moscow, Lushkov, by the 12th of November, the situation will stabilize. Today, the Parliament of Ukraine examined the situation in the Republic, which followed the change in price policies, increasing salaries and pensions. In his speech, the Prime Minister Vitaly Masol exhorted deputies to seize discussion of the unpopularity of the program of liberalizing prices for goods and services. He stated that in the coming months, Ukraine faces extremely difficult times. Only for energy sources, Ukraine's debt is assessed at $2.5 billion. Speaking of further development of base sectors, Vitaly Masol emphasized that the government subsidies will continue to be allotted to the companies of the coal industry, rural and residential housing industry. Only 1/4 of an hour was the duration of today's plenary session of the State Duma of Russia. For the rest of the day, the deputies said farewell to their colleague from the communist faction, Valentin Martinyanin. He died the 5th of November from trauma suffered during an attack by unidentified persons in the driveway of his Moscow home. Our television viewers are probably quite familiar with the face of this professor, doctor of juridical sciences, Valentin Martinyanov. He was one of those those who, in the Constitutional Court, defended the interests of the Communist Party. Later, he was elected to Parliament. During the years of the democratization of the country, in many ways accomplished is the fact that for convictions, a person is not prosecuted. Unfortunately, often there's no prosecution for crime either. Not succeeding in defending Russians from the tyranny of criminals, the members of the State Duma themselves this year are burying their second deputy. Crime has far more serious economic and, we'll say directly, political roots, which feed on the social situation, the collapse in the economy, corruption in the higher echelons of power. This is where the sources lie for the battle with crime. During their brief session, members of the State Duma adopted a decision to conduct, the 16th of November, a special hearing on the question of urgent measures to battle crime. Invited to the plenary session next Friday is the Minister of Internal Affairs of Russia, Viktor Yerin. Today at midday, a civil requiem was held. He remained to his very last hour true to his ideals chosen once and for all. The burial of Valentin Semyonovich Martinyanov were held at the Trykorovsky Cemetery in Moscow. Today at midday, for 1 minute, all the trains along the Privolga track came to a stop. This action was undertaken by railway workers as protest against the murder of the director of the railway, Yuri Ivanovich Tsitsil. 3 fatal shots in the back rang out here in the yard of his home, where he lived, where at around 7 p.m. he was returning from work. The murderer fled. Today, the member of the panel of the Ministry of Transportation is being buried, a dignified employee of the transport of the Russian Federation, an honorary railway worker, Yuri Ivanovich Tsitsil, who became another victim of criminal terrorism which has spread through the country, who needed the death of the director of one of the largest railway routes of the country. The answer to this question is sought by the Task Investigative Group, whose members include representatives of 5 law enforcement departments, including the District and Privolga, Transportation Prosecutor, Internal Affairs, and the Counterintelligence Service. Numerous versions are being checked, ostensibly connected with business affairs and directing the railroad, with criminal, simple crime. In all, since the beginning of the year, in Saratov there have been 181 murders, almost 1.5 more times than last year. Half of them have yet not been solved. Tomorrow in Russia, Militia Day will be celebrated. On the eve of the celebration, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Yerin, met with relatives of militia personnel who died in combat duty. This year, in fulfilling their duties, 162 militia personnel died. Their memory was honored today by a moment of silence by relatives of the casualties. The Minister of Internal Affairs of Russia, Viktor Yerin, employees of the ministry. Here it was stated that the number of attacks on a militia has increased by 1/3, and criminals, even those apprehended, most frequently get off easily. For now, the situation with crime is so involved that journalists and deputies, especially militia, are at risk, those who daily encounter criminals face to face. I think that the country has sufficient strength and means in order to resolve this problem, but we will only resolve it in one case, if everyone is involved in resolving it: legislators and the executive branch of government, and unconditionally law enforcement organs, which carry the main weight of the battle with crime, and all society. Meanwhile, by orders of the head of the Department of Internal Affairs of Omsk, all festive functions on Militia Day are cancelled. The city will bury 3 Omsk OMON personnel who died in Ingushetia 3 days ago during an operation to apprehend a gang which specialized in murders for hire. International information. As a result of midterm congressional elections in the United States, the Democratic Party has suffered a resounding defeat. Details in the report from Washington. I, for myself, personally clarified why, relatively speaking, in the national federal elections, the bloc Russia's choice lost. Russian observers at the elections in the United States, for them it seems the lesson was not in vain. An election in a country where democracy is 200 years old are a science, and here voters are dissatisfied. Today there's a shock in America, somewhat akin to the October one in Russia. For the first time in 40 years, the Republican Party gained majority in the House of Representatives, and now they also have majority in the Senate. This is a defeat for the president and his policies. The Americans made their choice, at first glance, a paradoxical one. They voted against a government which was able to lower unemployment and the budget deficit. Today they say that they chose personal freedom over the power of government and its apparatus. They voted against increase in taxes. In California, against expenses for illegal immigrants. In Florida, against legalization of the gambling business. The idea to decrease expenses for Social Security evidently received support. The philosophy of the country is changing. Liberalism has yielded to right sentiments, and this will have serious repercussions. For Clinton, his political future is now under question. An oppositional Congress is capable of blocking initiatives of the Democratic Party. America is not so far from us as it appears. After what occurred here, American policy in respect to Russia may change. Key posts in Congress will be occupied by people who are even less inclined to compromise. The UN Security Council welcomed the agreement reached in Islamabad, the inter-Tajik ceasefire. The special statement of the Security Council contains a demand to strictly adhere to the agreement and exchange prisoners. According to the report from Tehran, the second person in the Islamic opposition of Tajikistan, Afrar Razon Jada, flew to the region of the Afghan-Tajik border to personally be present at the exchange of prisoners of war. Alexander Shkiranza with commentary. The inter-Tajik dialogue is moving along with great difficulty, even outside Tajikistan itself. On the eve of presidential elections here, hope surfaced that the next third round of dialogues, which was conducted in Islamabad, would lead, if not to the end of the fratricidal war, which took the lives of 500,000 Tajiks, at least to a real truce and a so indispensable compromise. It's futile today to discuss the sense of holding presidential elections in a country which, during the years of its civil war, was splintered into several regional associations with their own interests, whereas previously clan relations are esteemed highly. In my view, one of the negative moments of these elections is not so much cases of falsifications during tallying of votes as the fact that regions which are attempting to push forward their own son of the Tajik people are even more divided now. With members of opposition who boycotted the elections, it appears there will be no more compromise. And for the first time in the history of ancient Tajikistan, elections were held, after which possibly not only Russia but the UN will have to seek new approaches to the inter-Tajik dialogue. The president-elect Emomali Rakhmonov and his supporters were able to avoid a restructuring of the sphere of influence, which, as in any other eastern country, would unavoidably have had serious repercussions. But if in the near future he's not successful in dealing with war and hunger cold, the consequences in Tajikistan will be catastrophic. Examples of this lie close at hand. Nearby is neighboring Afghanistan, which will long be a reminder not only to those who went through it, but for those who for now are on the border with it. Andrei Kozyrev today flew to Baghdad. During his 3-day visit, he will hold dialogues with the leadership of Iraq and specifically with the President Saddam Hussein, to whom he must convey a personal message of the President Yeltsin. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia will be present at the official ceremonies of Iraq's recognition of the sovereignty and borders of Kuwait in compliance with the demands of the UN Security Council resolution. The Iraqi leader also promised to cooperate with the International Red Cross in order to determine the fate of prisoners and missing Kuwait citizens. The UN Security Council, during open and lengthy debates, spoke out against the proposal of the United States of America to revoke the embargo on weapons deliveries to Bosnian Muslims. Of 10 members of the Security Council, only Pakistan and Oman supported the proposal of the United States. The remainder voted against. Among them were 4 permanent members of the Council. They are Russia, Great Britain, France, and China. A truly difficult mission has befallen the current chairman of the Security Council, the permanent representative of the United States in the UN, Madeleine Albright. She had made many various attempts. During the hearing in the General Assembly last week, she had openly tried to convince delegates from various countries to vote for the anti-Serb resolution, in essence proposed by the United States. On the eve of debates in the Security Council, the energetic lady, with the same objective, conducted an entire series of two-sided meetings, but evidently the arguments were not convincing. It's necessary to note the firm and fairly rigid position of our country. The permanent UN representative of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, in his speech noted that revoking the weapons embargo against the Muslims would have the most negative consequences for the political process and in continuing to supply humanitarian aid to the population of Bosnia-Herzegovina. In the opinion of the Russian diplomat, the current wave of increasing military escalation in Bosnia was possible only because, despite the ban of the international community, deliveries of weapons to the Bosnian government were secretly conducted by an entire series of Muslim countries. Debates in the Security Council inspire optimism. If the deliveries of weapons renew openly, then they will lead to more bloodshed in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Today, Boris Yeltsin heard the report of the head of the Federal Border Services of Russia, Andrei Nikolaev, about the results of its performance in the year 1994. The president confirmed the correctness of the course to create a strong and independent border service and approved its performance. It was partially positively commented that a closed, consistent border should be created to defend national interests of Russia and also to cover strategic directions which apparently are insufficiently defended after the collapse of the USSR. Today, the demarcation of the Russian-Estonian border began in the Pskov area, over 76.5 kilometers. The concrete posts with red and green stripes were installed. The work is complicated by the untamed environment. Construction materials have to be delivered basically by helicopter. Itatas reports that today in Tallinn, the results of the investigation of the disaster of the ferry Estonia were publicized. It sank on the 28th of September. It has been learned that the roll-on, roll-off ferry was overloaded, and included were contraband metals. On board were 40 tons of cobalt, 150 kilograms of osmium without export documents. Today, in Sri Lanka, presidential elections are underway. In the battle for the highest government post, there are 6 candidates. The election campaign on the eve of elections will enter the history of elections as one of the bloodiest. Overall, in various incidents, more than 60 Sri Lankans died. In northwestern parts of Italy, the most serious flood in the last half-century occurred. It was caused by rains which fell incessantly for more than 2 days. Damage is assessed at 10 trillion liras. At the book fair, which is being held in the capital of Brazil, unexpectedly for everyone, the president of the country appeared, the 63-year-old Itamar Franco, without any security precautions, arm in arm with a completely unknown companion. "She is my spiritual friend," he clarified to the reporters who swarmed him. Previously, in February of this year, at the Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, Itamar Franco fell in love at first sight with the actress and photo model of the Playboy magazine, Liliana Ramos, who, during the Rio Carnival, depicted a Persian princess. Photo reporters filmed a very hot moment when Lillian greeted the public from the president's lodge. It turned out that she was wearing nothing more than a soccer t-shirt. The scandalous photographs then encircled the entire world. Itamar Franco was threatened almost by impeachment, but evidently they calculated that the head of state was also a human, especially since for more than 10 years he's been divorced and lives alone. And according to his popularity ratings, 86%, Itamar Franco leads over all presidents who had preceded him in Brazil. To this he owes, of course, not only his love of life, but those reforms which were able to cut inflation in the country from 50 to 2% per month. Music, Dance and Love, Eternal Spring of Auguste Rodin and the Grand Waltz of Camille Claudel. These are not simply stylistic similarities. The talented student was the muse and companion which inspired Rodin to create these masterpieces. Claudel herself achieved her acclaim as a proven sculptress much later when they no longer worked together. The Little Châtelaine is one of the best sculptures of the world. The hope of Camille incorporated in bronze about her and Rodin's baby. All of these and other works of no less famous masters in the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th, such as Rembrandt Bougainville, Ramon Lestier, Collin, for the first time were brought to Russia for an exhibit and sale. The Belgian Dilleman Galerie, for 30 years already, has been providing the most rich and influential people of the world original works of art. To Moscow for this sale, more than 70 exhibits have been brought. Those who value the marvelous in Russia are apparently in abundance, and the first attempt to conduct such a function seems will have success and continuation. Today in Petersburg, a unique operation was conducted to transport the monument to Alexander III to the Marble Palace. To the ringing of bells and drumbeat, the 23rd of May, 1909, in Petersburg, on Znamensky Square, the triumphant unveiling of the monument to Alexander III was held, which was created by the outstanding sculptor Paul Trubetskoy. Probably then one could not have presumed how dramatically the fate of this mounted statue would change, and the fate of Russia. But the new government decided that the monument possesses no value. In 1937, the Znamensky Square was bereft of the almost 9-meter statue of the mounted king, which had become a prisoner of a Russian museum. For more than half a century, it was hidden from sight in a small courtyard. And today, the enormous monument has abandoned its captivity and emerged onto Petersburg streets. With great care, the monument of Alexander III was transported to the Marble Palace and erected on a pedestal. Justice has triumphed. The enormous mounted statue, one of the most significant and beautiful in the history of domestic art, by the assessment of Repin, has returned from its exile. In the concert hall, Ostankiно, bells were heard. To listen to Russian folk and spiritual music, the veterans of radio and television broadcasting were invited. These people, the majority of their lives, worked in state television radio of the USSR, and because of their efforts and their creativity, the multi-million audience watched and listened to television and radio broadcasts. No longer is there a Soviet Union. New workers have come and been confirmed, as well as new ideas. But you must agree, after all, many today experience nostalgia for broadcasts of former years. We're always trying to start everything from scratch, from a clean page. We're always attempting to build new worlds. I don't know what the new world of the future television will be like, but today it's clear. Without inheriting the best traditions of those programs and broadcasts which our veterans had produced, it cannot do. The topic of respect toward traditions and the strivings of our people along the long historical path is concluded by news of a decree signed today by the President of Russia, dedicated to celebrating in September 1997 of the 850th anniversary of the founding of our capital of the homeland, Moscow. The decree provides for issuing anniversary medallions and coins. With this, our program approaches its end. After the ads, the events in the sports world today, and the weather forecast for tomorrow. All the best. Goodbye.
Здравствуйте.
Hello. Russian hockey stars have confirmed their class in the third match of the benefit tournament. The Legions team in Nizhny Novgorod demolished the local Torpedoes 8-3. Scoring for the Stars team were Mogilny, Fetisov, Kasatonov, Zimak, Nemchinov, and Bakin, and Valery Kamensky stood out 2 times. Today, the matches in the 1/8 finals for the Russian Soccer Cup were held. The country's champion, Moscow Spartak, hosted Saratov Sokol. The game was extremely interesting, and to the joy of the few fans in attendance, ended with a victory for the hosts 4-3. At this hour, we know some other results as well. The Torpedo Army 4-2 on the penalty, Lokomotiv Moscow Gazovik Gazprom 2-1, Dynamo Kamaz 2-1. These days, tennis remains the main topic in Moscow sports life. At the Kremlin Cup, the regular matches were held. There were 2 sensations in the games. The Slovak player, Karol Kuchera, beat the Spaniard Sergio Bruguera in 2 sets, and the American Chuck Adams, with a score of 7-6, 6-3, beats his more famous compatriot, Todd Martin. And I'll note also that Alexander Volkov enjoyed victory today as well. The Russian basketball team held the qualifying matches for the European Championships against Finland. Russians held a decisive victory, 129-80. In the capital, Manezh Dynamo Stadium, the winter tournament of the Inter-Republic Association of Soccer Amateur Clubs began. The first victory was held by the Beskov Club. Good evening. Information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center. Tomorrow there will be no great changes in the weather. As previously, the northern regions are under the influence of a broad cyclone. On the Kola Peninsula, the Arkhangelsk area, the Nenetsk Autonomous District, and the Republic of Komi, it will remain cloudy with possibility of snow. Temperatures during the night and day from -5 to -10 in the northeast of Komi, as low as -20. Tomorrow, this broad cyclone will be joined by one more more moving from the Baltic area, according to its western peripheral area, to Karelia, the northwest area in the Baltic countries. From the north, cold air will seep in. Under the influence of an anticyclone, which is shifting from Scandinavia, atmospheric pressure will begin to grow. Therefore, in that area, tomorrow, partly cloudy skies without much precipitation in Karelia and in the northwest area during the -3 to -8 in the Baltic countries from +2 to -3. A cold atmospheric front will bring to Belarus and the Kaliningrad district cloudy weather with isolated periods of snow. Icy roads are possible. Temperature 0 -5 in the Volgovyatsk area, -10. Ukraine and Moldova. There, it is as previously warm and dry during the day, +7 to 12 degrees in the central Chernozem area and in the Rostov district. In the zone of an atmospheric front, cloudy weather with isolated rains, and in the central Chernozem area, wet snow. Morning and evening fogs. Temperatures during the day, +2 to 7 degrees. The lower Volga, the Stavropol, Krasnoyar Rim, the northern Caucasus and the Transcaucasus republics, as previously, are under the influence of high atmospheric pressure. Here, therefore, it will be partly cloudy with small probability of precipitation. Day temperatures +4 to 9 in the Krasnodar and Stavropol areas, 9 to 14 above zero. In the valleys of the Caucasus, +11 to 16. In Moscow, tomorrow, it will be partly cloudy with some light snow and icy roads. Temperatures at night, -1 to -3 in the district through down to -5. By evening, the temperatures will be -5 to -7. During the next 2 days, we expect further cold down to -10 to -15 degrees. The Russian Food Bank hopes that its shares will bring you high profits and that your morning will be pleasant. Goodbye.